Good morning, everybody. I wanted to introduce you to Nikki Cuthbertson. Um, she has been someone that I have known for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we were introduced through a mutual friend, and I feel like when we first met, I was like, oh, she does animal communication. That's cool. And I think I had you do a couple of my animals, but then it
Mm-hmm.
eventually mutated into you actually just helping me personally through my own divorce. So I think this wide scope of what you can actually do for people and how you serve people is pretty brilliant. So I was super excited to be able to introduce you to everybody. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Amber. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So go ahead and maybe explain to people what it is that you do with your work.
Damn, I was hoping you'd do that. Here we go. Tech error right off the bat. I'm laughing because I just wish I knew what it was that I really did. It just, for me, it's about really, I'm realizing more about honing the language of the soul. And the soul speaks in different ways. It speaks to us through our guides. It speaks to us through light beings on the other side that are here to help us and help us navigate this life. I don't think we were meant to do it alone. The animals understand the language of the soul, and all of nature does. And then we are, I think, the earth's thinking mind. And as we are aspects of the thinking mind, we do tap in a lot to our logic, but the thinking mind is also part of the one universal mind that is, I think, the great mystery. So to me, it's both invisible, but there's a way that it permeates all that we do in terms of support and love and light. It's just translating the language of light and love. So it may be that I do an animal communication session and the animals tend to mirror a lot of our stuff and or are here to help us with a soul contract around certain time frames in our life when we're navigating through certain parts of our journey. Sometimes it's like in your reading, your dad popped in. And so I work a lot as a medium, and that tends to be a different kind of reading, but all of it is for healing. All of it is for designed as support. And I feel that that's what I'm here to do, is to support people and to support animals in being heard and being seen. I think not being seen is a core wound that a lot of people have. And given that I'm an empath and most of the people that work with me are empathic, I think that there's this way that people know more than they give credence to. And it's through their own emotional guidance system, which is the language of light. And in terms of that, I think it's really helpful to discern what belongs to someone and is what belongs to you. So I think that that's a really important demarcation, because as empaths, we tend to feel into the collective field. So I work with that just in terms of helping people to read those different lines of demarcation to help them go through whatever they're going through, even if it's a really good time and it's a time of expansion, which is a lot of what you do in your coaching. And it's about really giving yourself permission to feel. Right. And I think the animals, and you know this with the horses, they kind of hold inside of them as a tension the things that are not resolved in us. And it's not that we need to be perfect, it's just that we need to feel it. And when you can really acknowledge what you're feeling at the moment, it has a way of dissipating and making room for whatever is next, even if it's the next thought.
Yeah, and I think that's such a big thing. And it's something that in the last, it's been a really intense month, but even in the last like 3 weeks, the idea of being so conscious of what you're feeling and not pushing it away, or, you know, and that's something I've always talked about, but it's always been more focused on like your thoughts, you know, don't worry about the thoughts, don't judge your thoughts, but the actual sensations in your body, really focusing on what is an emotion. Emotion is a sensation, right? Like it's like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you know you're angry? I just had this conversation with my smallest son last night. He's like, I'm frustrated. And I was like, well, how do you know that? He's like, I can feel it. And I was like, right. So they're just, you know, and we're so conditioned, I think, as a society to push away feelings that are uncomfortable, that the pushing away doesn't allow us to feel and then let go.
Yeah.
And so it's just like a theme that keeps popping up everywhere, all the time for me.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a couple of things that come to mind when you say that. And that is that a lot of us that are either seekers or on a spiritual journey, we tend to kind of want to bypass
Mm-hmm.
the physical body and values that bridge between heaven and earth and kind of going into our higher energy centers. And I really think the path to our spiritual kind of awakening is to be embodied. It's to really drop, and it's the descending current that allows us to really honor being human.
Mm-hmm.
And when you feel it, so when you were talking about this with your son, it's like it is in your body, and it's an energy that has a lot of motion within the physical body, and really understanding where it lives in us. It won't let us go until we discharge it. It has to be discharged in some way. And again, with the horses, they'll discharge it in a really big way. If we're not, they have to display it.
Mm-hmm.
That's their language, is to display this emotion. That's how we read it and how they read it with one another. But for your son and for ourselves too, that's why having some sort of practice that really helps us, that somatic, helps us with being balanced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think up until recently, I was doing a lot of, obviously not consciously or intentionally, but it was a lot of spiritual bypass. It was a lot of, it's not a negative emotion, it's not a positive emotion, it's just an emotion, where I was leaving that for non-judgment. But it was like, okay, now shift to what you're grateful for. It was never, let's sit with it and see what message is coming through. It was like, let's go to grateful. Let's, you know, and realizing that stuff is just going to keep popping up until you allow it to complete, you know, that whatever it is you were supposed to be getting from it. So that's just, even the mirror session that I did last Saturday, it was all about tapping into what you're actually feeling, and then allowing it and not judging it and feeling it, and then dipping back into, okay, where can you pull from that feels really good in your body, and then dip back into, okay, where is the discomfort, without staying stuck there, without overwhelming yourself, and then dipping back into where does it feel good. And we had some pretty profound things happen for people, and I was just like, all it is you just feeling, you know, and being aware of the sensations, and sometimes the smallest things can help that stuff just be released. And I think it's simple but uncomfortable, and we're conditioned to push away
Mm-hmm.
comfort, you know. So it's been
Well, and you're really describing a process of coming into coherence, you know, and I think this is one of the things the animals really help us with, is they don't expect us to be perfect. They expect us just to feel what we're feeling in the motion. I mean, in the moment, without, like you're saying, bypassing it. And the coherence increases your bandwidth and your capacity to have coping skills for life, when you know that you can feel the relief that you're going to show up for yourself and not abandon yourself into the abyss by not allowing yourself to feel. I feel the peace isn't from having your life be all lined up and being perfect, so you're having a perfect moment and so you can be at peace with it, but it's being at peace with the chaos and being at peace with the noise and the discord, and knowing that you're still going to show up for yourself. That for me is a peaceful moment.
great. Yeah, because you're not relying on an outside source or another person, or it's just like, oh, I know that it's perfectly okay that I'm feeling angry right now, I'm feeling frustrated, or I'm feeling scared. I can feel it
Mm-hmm.
with the lack of resistance then it just kind of swoosh goes right through and you get on with yourself. Um, so I was just trying to see if this was going live or not. Oh yeah, it is. I wanted to make sure if questions popped up for anyone that we would be able to see them. This is why you have people helping you.
Yeah.
The second person doing things. Okay. So for me, me starting out with you saying, oh, I would like to know what my horse is feeling just for fun. Like, you know, then it gets a little scary because I'm like, well, what if they don't like me? But I think when we started having a conversations, it was around a horse that I had that was, he was very worried. He had a lot of anxiety. He came to me like that. And when I look back now, that point in my life that I was at, that was just fully me. So there was no way, and I did help him at some level, but there was no way that I could really help him at the level that I probably could now, because I hadn't gone far enough in myself, you know. And it was just at the beginning when I started to go, oh, my own horses are now kind of falling apart. Like, what the hell? What is happening? And then I think that's when we just started talking strictly about me. And then some of the things that you had said were going to be coming into my future are fully now, right? And it was just stuff that seemed too ridiculous. I was like, I don't even know like where you would come up with something like that, but okay, cool. Like, it sounds great. But now that I'm here, and that was 2-3 years ago, I'm like, oh, I see. And so, and then we just hadn't talked for so long. And then you popped into my head and I was like, oh, I want to talk to Nikki. For some reason, I just feel this. I have several different people that I bounce in between when stuff gets really big for me. And I'm like, I need someone else to process this with that I trust, and that, you know. And I know we had talked about doing a podcast together, but then being able to reconnect with you again when Sugar was going through what she was going through. It was interesting that we never really reconnected after about the podcast, because I feel like this is what we were really supposed to dive into, because
Yeah.
I didn't expect to get the stuff that I got from it from just me trying to figure out when's the right time, you know. So it will be fun. I'm going to tell the story, but I want you to be able to fill in the gaps that I'm missing from my perspective versus yours, and why things were maybe happening the way they were. I know when we had that conversation, I was so in it and I was so emotional because this thing was I was like, I don't know why this is so big for me, you know. And that seems ridiculous because your dog is, you know, not well, but it was bigger than that for me, and I couldn't figure out why. So I'll start with introducing Sugar. She's a dog that I think she touched a lot of people. A lot of people knew her just from different properties that we were at. And so many people were always like, oh, if you ever need a home for Sugar, I will take her. And so many people are just so deeply connected with her. And I think a lot of dogs are like that, but there was something really deep about her, the way that she did that for people. And she was the dog that when I was going through my divorce and things were so crazy, she'd been with me for 10 years. The moment I would start to cry, she would be right on top of me. What I didn't realize is how much guilt that actually brought up for me. Like, it's okay, I'm fine. That was constantly what I would tell her. Like, oh, I feel so bad. Like, I don't want to upset you because I'm upset. So that was an interesting thing that I realized post all of this happening when I started to look deeper at it. She was very supportive of me and kind of always right there, like invasive the moment I started crying. And then in the last maybe 2 weeks before we put her down, she was just acting kind of funny, and she would be outside and just look kind of like out of it. And it was almost like she'd had a seizure, but there was no actual seizure. And then progressively it turned into actual seizures. And it was every morning, every time she stood up, her equilibrium would be all over the place. And so I started to look at this and go, this is progressing really fast. When she had her first actual seizure, anyone that knows me knows that in times of heightened stress and chaos, like, I go super calm. and I can literally sort through anything. I don't jump on the panic wagon. But when that dog had the actual seizures, I literally had never felt so helpless, so filled with anxiety, so all the things. Like, I was just like, I cannot do this. I don't know what's wrong with me. I cannot handle this. And I tried to equate it to, this is my dog, you know, this is why. But it was so much bigger than that for me. And I was just like, I can't do this. And so she was diagnosed with epilepsy. And so what happened was the medication she was on wasn't really helping. And so then I called Nikki, and what I sent her a picture, and then Nikki kind of, I don't know how much I actually even told you about what was going on before we had that conversation either. But
Not much, just that you're wondering around if it was her time or not, and if
yeah,
the pills didn't work, then what?
right. And I think I just needed somebody to say it's okay. And usually I'm that person for someone. I was like, who's going to tell me it's okay if I have to make this decision? And then and there was some conveying of, I believe she said, my son is not working. And that really, it was just like, oh, in my chest. And I was like, I know what that means. Like, it was like her light, like there was, who she was almost like disappearing. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, maybe a week before me and you, even before she even got so sick that it was diving into this deeper, I had started looking into somatic experiencing, and learning that. And I've interviewed two people that were amazing that both do this, but it never even occurred to me to like look deeper into it. I was like, oh yeah, somatic experiencing. But I started looking deep into it, and it was all surrounding the idea that the body has memories that the mind doesn't. So the body will hold certain traumatic things that you can't really tell a story around. And so I know Nikki had mentioned, there's a parental figure coming in from the other side, but you haven't lost a parent. And so I don't know who it could be. And I think you were kind of going through, maybe it's an uncle, maybe it's and I was like, Nikki, no. And it was my dad. And then I had told you the story about his death. And I believe that you had just said, you tell me that story as if it didn't happen to you. Like, it's very objective. But what I want to point out for this particular situation is that story, there is a chunk missing for me. I remember before, I don't remember the actual thing happening, and I remember right after. So for all of you that don't know that story, my father was epileptic, and Sugar had been diagnosed with epilepsy. And what I realized, what had been triggered within me with her having seizures and me witnessing it, was everything that I experienced when I was the only one there and my father having a seizure, and me not mentally remembering it, but when she had that seizure, that it triggered all of the things within my body that I maybe was supposed to trudge up to keep going with the lessons. And so one more thing about that conversation is, so I started to realize and connect those dots, like, oh my gosh, that is interesting that I even know to look that in. And after we put her down, my mom and my son were sitting outside, and I hadn't told my mom about our conversation or anything. And she kind of looks up and she goes, you know, what's interesting is, I think this is the anniversary of your dad's death. And it was like, what? So what I found so profound about all of that is that how you explained why animals come into our life was what actually like kind of sealed it all together for me. And so I would love for you to be able to give your, take on that piece, because that was huge for me, and going, oh my gosh, like she was here for a lot of reasons, but that for me, like, wrapped all of it up, like, holy crap. Like, and it changed the way I'm coaching. It changed the way my sessions are. It changed everything. So that was big for me. So that's why I was like, I really want her to fill in why animals come into our life, if you're talking about the soul contracts and that type of stuff, like that was big for me. So I wanted you to be able to share that.
Oh, thank you. Well, that was a really profound reading, and it was going places where you never. I always start a reading with kind of really supporting my ego with, it's okay, I don't know the answer. And that's always how I enter a reading. It's like I can't have any preconceived ideas. And so, in being a really blank slate and feeling this connection to your dad, all I knew at the time was that it was a male figure and that this person had a deep understanding of the process you were going through. I just felt this incredible kinship with you around compassion for your process, and but also with Sugar's process. And so when you said it was your dad and that he was epileptic, it kind of blew my mind. You know, I was not expecting that. And I didn't think that your dad had gone, but I knew it was a male figure that had this incredible connection with you. And one of the things that you didn't mention in the story you were just sharing was that you were really little when your dad died, and you witnessed it, and he died having this seizure in a lake.
Mhm.
And one of the things you were describing also was this incredible helplessness that you felt when Sugar was having this experience, and how normally, whatever normal is, you're like the pillar of strength, right? That shows up. And I think we when we are little and we have trauma, and I have stuff around that too, and I can feel this kinship with you around it. It causes us to unconsciously almost be like that superhero that shows up. For me, I ended up being a critical care nurse for 20 years, and it was like all about saving lives. And somehow there's this way that when we choose to throw ourselves into problem solving so that nobody else has to go through what we go through.
Mhm.
And it's hard to break away from that. I remember when my dad was dying, and I kept trying to be the nurse to try to micromanage, all of the stuff that I knew how to do, but it robbed me of being his daughter.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's part of the gift of what happened for you, is that you got to be a kid again. In like, I felt like your dad was there to say, you've carried this burden long enough. You get to finally reclaim some of your innocence and your wonder, and step out of like a PTSD that maybe you've carried, by relieving your physical body of that memory. And so I think it's really profound when you think about it that way. I think it's a really beautiful thing. Your dad, like, you've carried it long enough. It's the tool that your soul used for you to become who you are now in your coaching business, and as Amber, and all the gifts that you've offered into the world. And now, in addition to all those serious things that you know how to do, you get to be you again. You get to have your happiness and your natural state of wonder brought back, instead of always putting out everybody else's fires and helping them find their way. You found your way through that trauma. And certain animals, and also people, when they leave their physical body, they bring with them a part of our karmic patterns with them. There's always a part of us that dies with whatever is leaving their physical body. And for you, I think it was this incredible karmic thing, your own samsara, your own pattern of suffering around this piece. When you watch somebody pass the way you did, no matter what, even no matter how much your head knows that it wasn't your fault, there's a part of you that always wishes you could have done something and had the tools to make a difference in that moment, to create a different trajectory. And your little 3-4-year-old self had no way of coping with that moment. You literally had to watch your dad pass and drown from an epilepsy. And so when Sugar passed, she took that whole pattern of suffering around that, where you could take that as the tool that's taken, a couple of decades to hone and specialize you into this incredible finessed being that you are, and be able to offer your gift with the understanding, but also without the somatic and emotional pain. Like, you don't need the crisis anymore to define who you are. I think that's part of the greater gift for you now, is that you can create from a place of not having to have a crisis.
That's so funny. Not funny, but you say that and it makes me think of several situations. But one of my really good friends yesterday, he said, well, you know how you like that controlled chaos. And I was like, do you hear what I'm telling you? I'm telling you, this is my plan from here forward. And he's like, yeah, it's interesting because that's not what you would have done before. He's like, that's you choosing peace. He's like, but consciously. And I was like, right? He was like, right. But for him to call that out and say, yeah, you know, you like that controlled chaos. And I was like, I've brought so much drama into my life constantly with not consciously, but, you know, I think we call that stuff in when there's this stuff to trudge up without knowing it. And I, with this situation, I was like, oh yeah, I don't need to do that. This is how I'm going to handle it. And he was like, oh, okay. I was like, so yeah, it's interesting. And speaking to the piece that you had said about, no matter how young you are, I always felt guilt. Like I even remember at a young age watching like those 911 shows where the little kid does the miraculous thing and they call 911. And, you know, we were at a lake on a dock and obviously there wasn't cell phones back then. There was nothing I could do, but I still would watch those and go, there was always this guilt around, oh, I should have done something. Like I should have done something. And guilt is one of those things that pops up for me a lot. Even when I haven't actually done anything wrong in a situation, I'll feel guilt or, you know, and so that piece is interesting because I feel like that's been kind of streamed through. So yeah, so when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, definitely.
Well, I think that we all, within our culture, we have this complex where we need to be performing even under duress, you know, and it kind of like in superhero mode. But it's, it just creates more PTSD and more trauma. And the other part of that is that then, like you described, we start creating from this place of those hormones of stress being addictive. And so then we start creating more and more drama in our life. And it's so unconscious, but we're trying to work through this really critical point in our life that's so unresolved. And I think there's something with the animals being voiceless that they're really able to transmit energy and love and understanding and acceptance in a way that's really hard for humans to do. Our logical mind kicks in and there's all this woulda, coulda, shoulda done things differently, but we didn't. And then it's really hard to accept this moment within our shadow. But your cat, your dog, your horse, your bird, whatever, it doesn't expect you to be anything other than you are, and know that you're good enough right where you are with it being unresolved. And I think that there's a way that that's so hard. This whole culture is driven by self-improvement and all the ways you can do or be better. And you're perfect the way you are, right where you are. And we'll get, at least, you know, I know I'm treading on other people's belief systems, but we, in my belief system, will have more than one lifetime to figure it out. So even if you don't get it, it's like we act like this is the only lifetime we have and that we want to see that resolution because we're so impatient. But what I have found is that people on the other side, even them who are now not limited to time and space and the density of the physical realms, continue to evolve and continue to grow and learn. It's like we never stop, whether we're in our body or not. But I know for all of us, we would all love to be able to see it come into fruition, but it will be what it is to the degree that it can be, and it will be fulfilling enough. And I think that that's a really key thing for a lot of people is really understanding the nature of fulfillment. And I think that that's a really big thing around the animals when, you know, they can be, I've watched, like even with sugar, moments of them really not feeling good, but they will reach for what's possible in the moment
Mm-hmm.
and let that feed them.
Mm-hmm.
And I've watched so many animals where you're just so close to putting them down, and people call me because they want to know if it's the right time. And it's always a really hard call unless they make it just super, super obvious. And, but most of the time I watch them have these moments where they bounce back. And if we had put them down before that, they're constantly trying to come into this new place of coherence, this new place of balance and centeredness. And when they do, they go with the new norm. They
Mm-hmm.
don't stay attached to the way things were before they had whatever, an amputation or chemo or whatever it is that they're going to go through. Um, so it's interesting for me to watch them as a great student of life. I watch the animals, to see how they don't fight their nature. They
Mm-hmm.
just they're not judging their shadow or their more animal side, and we're animals. We have this incredible logical mind, we have our spirit, and because they're so embodied, they're also really connected to their spirit,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the way we, to me, bridge heaven on earth, is to allow yourself to be grateful for your body as a temple, or the physical way we're going to house our spirit. But we can't discount that we have a body and that we have more instinctual, primal aspects of ourself that actually cause our spirit to expand, and by having like you having this moment with your dad, always wanting nobody else to have that experience, it made you who you are and made you be of service the way that you are, in a really, really unique way. And while you've been offering your gift, you've been healing yourself unconsciously through your offering in the world. And that comes from one, who you are in your soul blueprint, but also your willingness to feel everything that you have felt so far.
Mm-hmm.
Helps things to come into resolution, and then that causes your spirit to expand. And then when you align with the expansion that your spirit you're having, there's just these moments of feeling fulfilled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Um, I never expected to get everything from that session. I was like, I just need somebody to tell me if it's the right time or not, because I don't want to make this decision on my own. But having that whole conversation with you was like, it was so profound, and it was like, yes, like, wow. And it opened up and really brought together a lot of different things that were happening for me, and it really showed me again how there is, no accidents. Everything is lining up exactly how it has to. And she did have moments where she would all of a sudden just like trot down to the barn, and she was like, I'm fine. And it was like, well, but it was like 5% of her day. So I think she made it very
Yeah.
clear. It was like, no, I'm done. And I think there was a moment at the end of the call where I don't know what we kind of were just sitting quietly, and I had this vision of my dad standing in front of me, and it was very clear, like, I'm here to take her. And I think at kind of the same time, you were like,
Yes.
well, I feel like, and I was like, oh, and then you're like, okay, yeah, that's what I was getting. But it's how do you say that to somebody, and not knowing, but having that strong feeling of my gut is also saying that, but it was the same moment where I was like, oh, this is definitely, and it's fine, and I think ironically in that process, she helped me grieve her dying in the last couple of days that she was still here. Because by the time I
Mm-hmm.
had the vet come here and do it, I wasn't upsetting to me. It was a relief. It was like, I know this is the right thing. But I feel like up until that point, I was sobbing uncontrollably, like every day, all day, like, and she was obviously there. And I was like, no, I feel guilty because you shouldn't be comforting me when you're the one. So it really trudged up so much stuff right towards the end. But yeah, it was a huge gift, something that I did not expect. But for you personally, do you have a story around an experience for you, like maybe a personal animal that really made a huge shift in the way you see things?
It was my first horse. Yeah, yeah. And I got him on my Saturn return. It was really interesting. And so he just came in with, you know, I think a lot of us with in the day trained in a certain way with our horses, and it was more of a traditional way and didn't always include energy. It was much more around our, leg and rein aids, and having these majestic beings do what we told them to do, and if they didn't, we'd lunge them harder, and all of those things. And this horse really, really just taught me about how I felt. And um, I opted to not have like a lot of training. I did take lessons, but it's interesting. I felt like it was much more about the relationship than it was about riding. And in hindsight, in all honesty, I can feel all the ways that my ego would be triggered by him, and so if he'd take off with me, I'd use a stronger bit, and we could say that, maybe there's a way that that's safe, but I wasn't really connecting with how I felt when he would take off with me, or what I did around my own insecurities to maybe prompt a moment where, in my lack of confidence, he took over. There wasn't the focus on that. It was more around obedience. And for him, I feel like I started having this really interesting feeling around, in particular, women going into submission.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that men don't have that ability to do that. I think that we have both male and female energy within each one of us, but the feminine aspects of us that have been conditioned to go into submission and sacrifice our wildness in order to be in relationship came from my love affair with this horse, who in the end, all I wanted was for him to be him. And he, in a moment of my own crises, I started hearing him. Like, I started hearing his thoughts and feeling his emotions. But I realized that there's this incredible parallel for me wanting to understand what it means to be in relationship and to be free and not be owned. Like, it's kind of been my theme. And I think most people think of me as very quiet and soft spoken and really zen. And I am those things, but I'm fiercely, fiercely independent and can't really be owned. And the marriage I'm in really, really supports that. And he doesn't want that part of me. He lets me have my wildness. And when I come to him, I feel like it's a horse that comes to you out of free will and choice, and out of the respect. And I feel like that's the kind of love that I want everybody to be able to experience, but you can't unless you are able to give that to something. And so my children and my horses have been the place, because horses are so much bigger. All we can do is offer another bit, but really, if a horse wants you off their back, they're going to get you off their back. It really doesn't matter about the bit. It's really about an understanding of the energy that you're projecting through your seat and through your hand. And so if that isn't there, they either choose to be in relationship with you and take care of you, or they eject you, or they do whatever they're going to want to do, because they know there has to be an element of respecting what you're in relationship with. And if you think you're going to come into it from a place of dominance, some of them will submit. And I've never wanted that part of them that just does the cooperation because they think they have to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want that from my kids. I don't want it from my husband. I want to know who they are, including their rough edges and their preferences and their opinion. And my first horse gave that to me. And as we went through time, he became kinder and kinder and gentler. But the truth is, so did I.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what you were talking about, the mirroring, I don't know which came first, if it was him or me, which decided to acquiesce and yield. And now I have this horse that is very, very alpha, very dominant, and super in your face and pushy. And he was a gift, and he isn't the kind of personality that I would choose in a partner. And he has been up there with one of my best teachers, because again, he's owning his wildness, which is the thing that I said I always wanted. And here it is in my face in a way that is maybe more adrenaline than I want at this point in my life. And so it's requiring a different, deep kind of listening, and some days he just really doesn't want to be ridden. And actually the truth is he wants to be a pet. Mm-hmm. So do I have the right, after where I am from all my understanding now, to tack him up and do this when he's actually making it really pretty clear to me that that's not what he wants? So I try to find where we can cooperate and we can have a relationship, and where he offers this yielding to this that becomes more of me reading it as an offering. And when he says no, I honor that too. Mm-hmm. But that may mean that I don't get to ride as often as I would want to ride. He's not really the riding horse, right? And so for me, it's really been a process around respecting another being's right to assert themselves. Mm-hmm. And then is there a way that we can meet in the middle, and can I have my needs met or my desires met? And if you're not the way that I'm going to do that, then that's okay too. And really being at peace with that.
Yeah, I think it's one of the coaches that I follow, he had just posted something yesterday in regards to his relationship with his wife, and saying how so many people, what they want to do is they want to provide for their spouse and take care of them. But that oftentimes means working extra so that you can do that. And obviously we all know that doesn't work, because then you're spending time at your job and you're using it as the excuse, well, I'm only trying to provide for you. And then it makes whatever opposing partner that is feel like their needs aren't being met at that level anyways, and want them all the time and always be reaching, when can we hang out, when can we spend time, when can we? And it feels like this pull. And he said what he had done is he'd shifted, and he woke up every day and said, how can I meet your needs right here, right now, and support our relationship as the first priority? And he said sometimes that meant getting to meetings late. Sometimes it meant losing clients. It meant missing calls. And he's like, but the shift came when she was so filled up that she didn't want me to miss any of that. She wanted me to thrive in my business, because she knew she knew that she was his first priority. And then what had shifted was she didn't need that from him as much. It was like this, and then they were giving to each other, and then his business actually increased because of that. So is it interesting focusing on what can I do for you? What can I do for you in the boundaries, and making sure that it's not an abusive relationship, obviously, but both ends then being able to come together and want to give the other one what they wanted, as opposed to, well, I'm doing this for you, and having that tinge of, well, it's not really for you. It's your needs are being met, your ego of wanting to make the money and being seen as the provider, but not actually giving the other partner what they really wanted, which was time and presence. So I think that's interesting, being able to honor, because I always tell people it is like you're in a relationship. They're relationship coaches because it is what it is. It is what it is. And I have three very different horses, and there's one where, you know, she was consistently walking out of her stall every time I walk in. And all that it did was irritate me. Like, okay, I've owned you since you were 4 months old. Like, why is it when I lift my hand too fast, you flinch? You know, I'm like, I've literally never hit you. Like, if she were to come into my barn as a training horse, I would be like, maybe someone was rough with her, you know, okay, that horse, no, she's super sensitive. But me going, okay, fine. I'm just going to stand in your stall doorway and I'll sit here. Sometimes I sit down and I talk to people in the barn aisle. It's like, do you, like, you know, what is it? Like, what is the problem? Instead of me in there wrangling her, it caused me to just go, okay, well, what do you need? I'm just going to sit here with no agenda. Like, I just quit. I quit chasing you around. You're 6 now. Like, why are we still doing this? I think part of it became a habit, because this is how, you know, and it was like, how do I break that cycle? Okay, I'm going to do something completely different and remove everything. And it did shift, you know, I walk into her stall and she stays there now. But it was interesting because what was it being highlighted for me? You know, it was my agenda. No, you shouldn't walk away from me because I've never given you a reason to walk away from me. Like, this is ridiculous. But it was all this judgment around how she felt. You know, you shouldn't feel that way. You know, and how is that different from me saying that to a partner I'm in a relationship with, or a friendship, or whatever it is? You shouldn't feel that way. I was like, oh, she's like, bye. That feels really terrible. I don't want to deal with anyone. Like, you know, I was like, oh, okay, you're allowed to feel how you feel. It doesn't matter if I don't think you have a reason. You obviously do, or you wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
So it is.
And in both of those cases, both your horse and the gentleman with the wife that you used in the example, it just brings up feelings of resentment. It's really interesting. And then when somebody feels resentful, it starts this cascade of defensiveness. Mm-hmm. And that has a really prickly feel on the energy field. And it's very unspoken. But when you're with someone who feels resentful and you want it to feel peaceful, a lot of times that triggers a neediness, and it just starts this downward, or not necessarily downward, starts a relationship, a habit in the relationship, that when you stop doing things the way you did, like you did in that moment, it offers a different opportunity to arise, you know, and something new, which is what happened with your horse.
Yeah. It's just interesting. It's constant, isn't it?
Oh, they're so like helping us be in the present moment always.
Right. Yeah. And I have found when we talk about traditional training versus how I do things now, my gelding that I used to get into a lot of big conversations with, I don't know if it was you or if it was Rochelle who had said, this horse isn't here for you to go show. I think it might have been Rochelle, and she knows not much about horses, but she came out, and it was around the same time you had come out here once. And she said, this horse is here for your spiritual growth. And at that time I was like, okay, well, I spent a lot of money and a lot of time training on this horse because all I want to do is go show. And she's like, And I was like, okay, whatever, you know, you don't know. And then, you know, and then now he's got a lameness issue that is genetic, and he's had since he was probably 2, where he's got, if I ride him too hard and work him too hard, he will go lame forever. But he's really great at me riding him around here. But ironically, now that pressure and that agenda is gone, I don't have to use spurs with him. There's hardly any resistance. I can get his spins, his stops, everything is, and I never train on him, but it's all there. But it's that me just meeting him where he's at. And then sometimes I ask him for that stuff and I'm like, dang, like, you're so good. Like, why can't we go show? But it's once that agenda was gone, then all those pieces came together. So I wonder if, you know, if we had people think, well, if you think that way, then how will you, I want to go show, I want to go do performance stuff, you know, how will I get that done? And I'm telling you, that horse, his performance is way better with minimal effort on my part, because there is no resistance. There's no any of that resentment, you know, and so it's interesting how that it is possible. And I think there's trainers shifting now to that space, but it was just interesting where I was like, I don't even have to put spurs on. Like, you're so forward, you're so around, you're so carrying yourself. And I'm like, oh, that's all I needed to do was just not care as much.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Interesting. Oh, it's getting around 11. Well, that went fast.
It did.
So, where can people find you if they would like to have conversations with you in regards to their horses or their animals or whatever it looks like?
Yeah, my website is NikkiCuthbertson.com. So it's Nikki, and then last name Cuthbertson. And there's a contact page there. And I have a Facebook page. The Facebook business page is Nikki Cuthbertson Intuitive Soul Support for Humans and Their Animals. And people can message me there. And then on Instagram, it's just my name as well. So any of those work. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from people.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to go through the comments because we, of course, used up the entire hour, but I'll go back through and then, and same, feel free to answer anything that comes up for people in the comments. But I'll post a link to this on YouTube as well, so you'll be able to have it to share. Is there anything else that you feel like you want to say to feel completed with our conversation?
I think my messaging with the animals in particular is that they're incredibly sentient, and they have both ceremony and rituals that they do with one another in nature, and express deep sense of caring and compassion for one another. I once had this really beautiful experience with a horse that colicked in the middle of the night, and then the mare was standing at the gate, and he had died on his way to UC Davis, and she was wondering where he was. And I went to comfort her and validate that he wasn't going to come back, because she saw him go be trailered off. And what came forward just really moved me to tears. She was really, really sad and grieving. And he was in a pasture that was connected to, with just, tape between another pasture. So he was surrounded by like 4 or 5 mares. And she described how they all held vigil and how they all protected him during the night and stood over him, and was basically sending him healing and sending him energy and caring, but in a way that was so beautiful because it was also connected to the earth as an energy that was holding him like in a womb, that was protecting him while he was down. And I just feel like there's so many unseen forces that are very real to me. But the fact that they held vigil and sent him healing and love, I know made that horse come into completion. I could feel that. And so since then, I did another reading for someone who had 5 dogs, and one of her dogs is passing, getting ready for his transition. And we did a session where all the animals spoke what they wanted to have that animal hear, mm-hmm. and have her hear. And then we asked him what he needed to come into completion with his life. And then we also asked what all the other animals in the household needed. And that one episode with that horse made me really open up my mind to what is possible, that we just think that they're just standing there in a field, mm-hmm. But meanwhile, there's this whole interactive thing that is an unseen way of helping them, their herd members, come into completion with their lives. And it happens on a lot of different levels. It's just when we get to be privy or quiet enough to be able to hear the way they interact with one another, because a lot of us want it to be about us. It's our relationship with the animal, and it's so special and so fun to tap into that. But they have their own emotional lives with nature and other animals that are friends or family members to them, and it's really cool to tap into that too. It's opened up my mind out of the limitations of where my mind was to what can be possible. And so, I don't know, I wanted to share that with you because it really touched me really deeply when I tapped into that.
Right. So I was actually going to, how are you on time? Do you have like 5 or 10 more minutes?
I do.
Okay. This is what I wanted to end. And you just reminded me of saying that. I was like, oh, is that if people are, because I know this is what you helped me with when you were here. I always tell this story when I was transitioning from being like a horse trainer, and I was like, there's so many things that are coming through for me, and I don't know how to do that without people going, what the heck is she doing? And you would ask me, close your eyes and tell me what a session that you would do would look like if it was exactly what you wanted it to look like versus what you think it should look like. And it was around the time that I was working a horse at a different barn, and it was a trailer loading thing. And it was interesting because no one was listening to her. And so when I closed my eyes, I said, well, I would take them to the round pen and I would sit with them for 5-10 minutes, and I would ask them what I needed to know before we did this. And then I would go whatever direction it went. But I didn't feel like I could do that because these people are paying me a good chunk of money to show up at their barn, and to see me stand still in the middle of a round pen with their horse is going to confuse them. And it was interesting because I had never really felt like I could get clear, or I just didn't trust myself, I guess, enough to know if I was getting some type of a message, it meant something, or if it was just my brain being overactive. And immediately after that conversation, I had gone out to that barn, and ironically, he had brought me the horse, and he had to go help. He was an assistant of the trainer, so he went to go tack up horses or whatever. So he left me alone with her, and I was like, okay. And this horse actually came back into my life again through a different owner. And so I stood there, and it was very clear to me that she was like, nobody listens to me. Nobody's listening to me. No one has ever listened to me. And I was like, okay, but it was clear like Dr. Dolittle, like loud. And I was like, I'm just like either losing my mind. This is what I've always said I've wanted. I was like, this would make everything so much easier. I'm just going to roll with it because no one's here. So whatever. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to let this happen. And it was interesting because the owner that had him then, he had just gotten her, I don't think for very long. And what she had said is the bit that he's using, I don't like it. I like my job now, because she was doing dressage and then she'd shifted to eventing, and she was very clear, like, I like what I'm doing now. I like him. I like my new job. It's much more fun, but I really prefer the bit from before, like a lot. And I just want someone to pay attention to me. And I was like, okay, and she's like, do you promise to tell him that? And I was like, oh, that's going to be awkward. And I was like, sure, I'll tell him that. Thinking, I'm going in my head, like, I think people are going to think I'm losing my mind. That's fine, whatever. So anyways, I work her in the round pen, take her to the trailer, and I'd worked her twice before. It took me probably an hour and a half to get her in before, and it wasn't solid by any means. But that day she just walked right in. And I was like, this is like some kind of a fluke, right? So I took her out. I loaded her like 4 or 5 times, and she just stood quietly in there. And I'm like, oh. So then I see him walking up, and after this, a couple months later, I told him the whole story because he thought I think he looked at me like, what are you talking about? But okay. And he came down, and I was like, yeah, she seems great. Like, let's, you should probably load her because you guys are going to go to your show and whatever. And so he takes her from me, and I'm standing there, and she gets halfway up the ramp and won't get in. And I'm like, and she turns and looks at me, and it's like, you promised you would tell him. And I'm like, oh, you got to be joking me right now. Like, I'm literally going to look like that crazy trainer. How do I even start with saying this? Like, I was like, oh God. And he's like, oh, what do I do? And I'm like, and she's just at the ramp, like with her head turned around, staring at me. And I looked at him and I said, is the bit that you're using different than the bit that you were using, that her previous owner was? And he had said, he's like, I don't know, but I could check. And I was like, do you promise that you'll check? It's not the actual bit. It was just the material of the bit. I think it might have even been the same bit. It was just, she didn't like the way this new bit tasted. And he was like, yeah, I promise I'll check. And shit you not, boom, she just got right in the trailer. And I think I have even a picture of him and her that day, and and she's loaded or whatever. And so like a couple months later, I told him, I came, and then he had shared with me. It's interesting because they went away to a show back east. It was one of their bigger shows, and he had an animal communicator speak with her, and she had mentioned the bit because I don't think he had changed it yet. And I was like, are you joking? And he's like, it's so crazy that you just told me that. So it was validating for me, and made me not afraid to share the story with the actual now owner, who's the trainer as well. And she was having trailering issues. And I was like, she's very clear that she needs to be heard. So, so what I was getting to is that how do you help people? Like, is there like a process that you take, that you can, steps that you can give on how to hear what their animal is
Mhm.
trying to tell them?
I do. I teach it a lot, but honestly, one of the things that comes up for me when you're speaking that is it is so hard for us to just be us. We're so conditioned to try to fit in a way that minimizes who we are.
Mhm.
And it's really hard to reveal your truth. And I think that more than a technique around how to communicate, because there are steps, because the language is universal. It's your sense of empathy and feeling and listening, which all of us could use to be better listeners. But once you have that dialed in, you can do it, and anybody can do it because you were born with it. It's way harder for you to go out in the world and just do you. And I think that the process is to have the confidence to be who you are, speak your truth in a way. So a lot of us need to lean on the contrast, meaning like, despite the circumstances or the way that it appears, this is what I'm feeling, right? It's like we're kind of like needing to lean on one thing to define another. And it's a whole nother thing to just stand in your truth and let people, know that whatever you say either grows someone, or even if they're in an argumentative mood, that it helps them to define who they are, even if it's contrary to your vision. And standing and owning your truth is a really hard thing. And the animals can teach us how to do that. And that's what we are so amused about. When they're rolling in stinky stuff, or they're running around doing zoomies, or they're doing silly things, they're not just doing it to entertain you. What's so entertaining is they're so exuberant about being who they are.
Mhm.
And so it's like in that moment, now that you felt emotionally safe, which is a really big deal, you were able to just really express who you were and this horse's truth. And now every time you do it, it'll be that much easier for you.
Mhm.
And that horse insisted on you tapping into your gifts, and you being you, and you being her expression of her truth. And times are changing. They need us to be that right now, or things will never change. They won't have the things will have to change if we acknowledge them as sentient beings. And so hopefully we're living in a time where, along with our humanity evolving, we can evolve to upgrade their presence in our life as a lot more than what they have been in the past.
Mhm.
So, but
Yeah.
yeah, there are definitely ways you can learn how to do it. And the number one thing is to quiet your mind and have some sort of contemplative practice that allows you to soften your mind and go into your own inner world, your own inner landscape, and be able to listen and breathe. And then when an animal communicates with you, it's usually the first wave of emotion that you're feeling on when you're in touch with how you already feel, whether you're triggered or feeling neutral, but at least you have an idea of how you woke up feeling. Then anything on top of that is something, after you merge with an animal, a communication from them.
Yeah.
And then that emotion gives rise to either a picture, or a sound, or a feeling in the physical body in a somatic way, or just your gut knowing. All of those things arise when the animals communicate. And so it becomes this symphony of usually more than one route that they're using to communicate with you. And when you're really attuned as an instrument, it's like they're just pulling on a cord that vibrates and gives you a felt sense of what they're feeling in that moment, that you get to translate. And then, depending on how much life experience you have, how much bandwidth you have, you can go in and a lot of people like you, like me, that have had trauma in our life aren't so afraid of our shadow. We can just go into those murky things and pretend like those things don't exist. But you can, because animals have shadow, that's what makes them primal and instinctual. It's one of the things that's actually really relevant about who they are. And I think we as humans have this way that we're really instinctual, and then some of us stay reactive and some of us hone it into a place where we're just responsive. And that, for me, that's a really nice intent to have, is just be responsive based on how we're feeling. And but that's how they communicate, is they trigger like this whole vibratory symphony of who we are. But it's helpful to know who you are, so that when you own that, anything on top of that is coming from elsewhere.
Right. Yeah. So getting quiet and owning what's yours, and then allowing anything that wants to come in on top of that, and kind of trust.
Yeah. And then having a practice, that allows you to get quiet for that. So, having either a breathwork practice or a mind quieting practice, or a creative process that helps you to quiet your mind. And then intention is huge, and expectation is huge. So going from a place of intending and expecting that you'll get information, and then being quiet enough to receive that information however it wants to show up, and not having preconceived ways, is really helpful.
Very cool. Thank you so much. I feel like I could just talk to you for hours. But this has been very fun, and I appreciate you spending time with me and us, and so excited to share you with everyone that doesn't know you yet.
Thank you. Well, if you send me a link with the questions, if any questions from people came up, maybe I can do a little video answering those, and I can post those too.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. I'll do that for sure. All right. So thank you. And I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you, Amber. Thank
All right,
you.
bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, you guys. Thank you for spending the time with us. And like I said, I'll reach out. I'll find the questions. If you guys have questions specifically for Nikki, you can drop them in the comments, and then we'll make sure she gets them and she will respond to you guys. So thank you for hanging out with us. I will talk to you guys later.